Sometimes as you work with photos, there'll be things that are distracting, whether it's an unwanted object or an area that needs to be blurred or sharpened. Let's start by blurring a background. In the library, feel free to navigate to folder number 5. And let's work with these images. I'll start with a portrait example. What I'd like to do here is blur the background a bit. From the Develop module, I'll choose my adjustment brush. And I'll bring up the overlay. Now, using green isn't going to work very well. So I'm going to switch to black and start to paint. Initially, I'll turn off the auto mask. This way I can rough things in pretty quickly, going around my subject. But as I get closer to the subject, I'll turn auto mask back on so it starts to recognize the edges of her body and the hair. Remember, pressing Shift-O will let you cycle through the colors, and this might help you detect areas that you missed unintentionally. There we go. Now that I've gotten it, let's adjust things a bit. I'll pull down the clarity and instead deal with sharpness. And let's drag that to the left to make the area less sharp. If we view this at 100%, this is a bit easier to see. And so here's the original, which had a bit of softness to it already, and now we've softened it even more. What we can also do is darken that ever so slightly. Now, if it's not enough, there's a really easy fix. Simply choose the tool again and click on the dot. In this case, I've chosen the background. You'll notice that the subject herself had already been painted. With the background selected, I can right-click and say Duplicate, and even do that again. And now the effect has been compounded. So 3 separate instances have been applied, each of them defocusing the background. If we take a look at that side by side, you'll see that the background has been further softened and really is removing the subject a bit, creating a nice frame. Additionally, you might want to consider using a regular radial mask. At this point, taking the radial mask tool and drawing on your subject will allow you to select the person. There we go. I'll adjust that and put a really good feather. So it's got a gradual blend. Further blur outside and darken things down just a little bit, as well as pull down the color a little. And now what you see we've done is we've created a nice focus on our subject. She's quite clear, but the background becomes more of a frame and is less distracting. Now, with portraits, you're often going to be very specific, painting in areas. But if you're dealing with something that's more of a landscape or a product photo, you can do this even quicker. In this example, what I'm going to do is just remove things and tone down areas of the photo. Quite simply, we can grab the graduated filter here, and I can click and drag to create a transition. Now, what we can do is adjust things, such as darkening that background a little bit, moving out some of the color, pulling down the shadows and the highlights, and moving sharpness in the opposite direction. Remember, just like the portrait, you can duplicate that and stack that up. Now, if you do that, you might not want to put so much of an adjustment to exposure on the second instance, but you can feel free to adjust the overall sharpness to tone that area down. What that really allowed us to do was de-emphasize the distracting object in the background and move our emphasis to the foreground. Removing an object or a person from the scene can be a bit tricky, and it all depends upon how perfect you want to be. Let's start with Lightroom, but eventually I'm going to take you into Photoshop as an alternative. If you're dealing with a photo that's pretty straightforward, it's easy to remove things. Remember, you do have the ability here to simply remove content by brushing. what you can do is select the tool here for spot removal, and it gives you two options, clone versus heal. Healing allows you to paint over a distracting object. So, for example, if we take a look here, I can see some grass that's a bit distracting. Well, very quickly, I can paint over that, and Lightroom will look around and find adjacent pixels and blend those together. So in this case, some of the pieces of grass that were on the ground that were distracting have been removed. That works well. You can easily go after different types of objects and pull them out pretty quickly. If you see something that's a bit bigger, you can also refine things here. Let's zoom out here a little bit. And what I'm going to do is switch this to clone for a moment, and I can paint over the distracting area. Right bracket for a bigger brush. And when I let go, it samples. Now, not from a very good point at this point. So what I'm going to do is move up here and drag this back down into the sand. And it will reanalyze and pick some new sand texture. And you see that it did a good job. Now, cloning versus healing is up to you, and nothing says that you can't do both. Sometimes people will clone to get rid of a big object, then go back and do a healing pass. Putting a little bit here at the edges, for example, can help. There we go. Let's get a nice big brush, and I'll paint over some of the edges just to blend this a little better. And it does a nice job. Just remember to set the source point for something that's more like the subject. Now, healing will try to blend the colors there, so it didn't do a bad job, but manually selecting it did a better job. And now what I was able to do was pull out some of the distracting little objects and even some of the bigger objects. Now, this does have a variety of uses. Sometimes as you shoot, there'll be elements that bother you from the composition. While I like this overall scene, I find this branch that's intruding to be a bit obnoxious and kind of distracting. So using that tool, I can click very quickly, adjust the size and the feather, and then paint over the target area. Remember, you can use your keyboard shortcuts too of left and right bracket. Once you release, it will sample from another area and attempt to blend. Now, sometimes you may notice that around the edges, you get a weird color halo. This wasn't too bad here, but if you do see any sort of color spill, go back with the brush, take a smaller brush this time, and paint over a second pass. That could be useful so that you can get another instance in there. Using the smaller brushes, you can go over an edge and have it blend, or pick up any small areas that are problematic and then set your source point where you want it to go. Notice that it says it's cloning from here to here. So I can reverse that and drag the sample point, and looking at the arrow will help you understand what's really happening there for a better blend. All right, that worked quite well. What about if the object is bigger, like a person? Well, in this case, it can get a little tricky. I'm going to do this two ways. First, let's do it in Lightroom. I'll zoom in on the image here and punch into the lower corner. In this case, you might want to initially do a clone. When you have a hard edge like the curb here, cloning is a better idea. So I can go ahead, adjust the size a little bit, and click, and then adjust where it comes from. In this case, I'll tell it to sample the curb. And you see it does a pretty nice job. Let's adjust the feather there a little bit after the fact, and you see how it blends. Now, I can continue to paint. Using that tool, I'll click again, draw a little bigger stroke, and make sure to set the source point manually for the clone. and you see that the curb blends pretty well. Now we'll switch to heal, and I'll paint over my subject, being careful of where I start to sample from. Now again, you're going to need to pay close attention to what pixels you're grabbing. But if you continue to work, eventually you can build this up and sample and clone. However, the process of doing this on a raw file can get a bit tedious. As you can see, there's nothing quick about trying to clone a complex object inside of Lightroom on a raw file. So instead, let's switch to Photoshop and I'll show you how easy it is. I'll click on this to delete away these brush strokes. And now, with the photo selected, I'll choose Photo, Edit in, Open as Smart Object in Photoshop. This will send the raw file over into a new layer. Photoshop opens, and what we can do is easily make a new layer here to adjust. You'll find there's a couple of great tools like the Spot Healing Brush or the Healing Brush tool. Let's zoom in on the subject, and I'm going to choose Content Aware here and choose to sample all layers. So now I can easily paint on the empty layer, but it's going to sample and try to pick new pixels from around it. And you see with a little bit of painting, we can start to remove objects. And that works pretty well, but let's try something else. Now, in order for this to work, I'm going to duplicate this layer. You can do that with a right click and duplicate. And then if it's a smart object, just rasterize it. This converts it to normal pixels. Now, let's use the Quick Selection tool. This tool is quite useful for making a selection. You can draw over your subject, and it should find them. There we go. If there's things you don't want, just Alt or Option click to remove them. There we go. Now, with the subject selected, I'll choose Select and Mask. What I want to do is get the subject selected. So looking at it over white, I'll adjust the radius a little bit with a Smart Radius. And I'm going to expand this so it gets a little bigger. Little feather. And now we've got our subject selected. I'll click OK. With the subject selected, I can choose Edit, Fill, and choose Content Aware. When I click OK, it's going to analyze the pixels, look around, and make new ones. And let me do that again because it's pretty amazing. Edit, Fill, Content Aware. And every time you run that, it gets a little more accurate. And if you look at that, it's as if the subject was never there. Now, if you need to, you can use your Clone Stamp tool. S for Clone Stamp, Option click to set your source point, and you can paint in pixels. So if you need to touch up an edge a little bit, you can. But now, if you look at the original and the new one, it's pretty amazing. Close and save, and when we switch back to Lightroom, the new file is sent back. So, there you have it, the original photo and the new one. And sometimes it's just not worth fighting in Lightroom when Photoshop is just a jump away. Vignettes can often be added for stylistic purposes to brighten or darken the edges. They also serve as a corrective adjustment if you're getting a shadow from the lens hood. Let me show you. For this image, I'm going to add a stylistic vignette to draw the focus of the viewer. This front wall is a little distracting here. So using the graduated filter here, I can click and drag. And this creates a nice blend. Now, we'll leave color and tint alone for temperature there, but I'm going to pull the saturation down slightly and darken the overall exposure as well as pull down the shadows a little bit. That looks better, and let's defocus that slightly. So using the sharpness slider, we'll pull that down. Now we can add a stylistic vignette, and this can be done two ways. If you want to do this globally, just come down to the Effects section and you'll see the ability to add a post-crop vignette. What this does is look at the cropped image and then adjust. So for example, if I cropped a little bit off the top here and adjusted the composition, now when I adjust the post-crop vignette from the effects section, you'll see that it uses the crop to determine the vignette. And that works great, but it's going to naturally be centered. You can adjust the midpoint to adjust the blend, the shape of the vignette, and how much feathering or transition there is. You'll also see the ability to change the style using 3 different methods. I find that highlight priority looks the most natural and allows you to balance out some of the brighter spots. If you take a look at that side by side, you'll see that we darkened one section using the graduated filter, then added a traditional vignette to pull the eye into the center of the photo. Now, this works quite well, but if you want maximum control, just stick with the graduated and radial filter, and you could put your vignettes anywhere. In this next example, I'd like to be a bit more specific as to where the focus of the photo is. So I'm going to start by darkening the edges. I'll click and drag to create a nice blend here, and darken the left edge a little bit. Reduce the clarity slightly and a little less sharpening. Let's do the same here on the right-hand side. There we go. But I'll leave sharpness alone, actually. That looks good. We darkened the edges, but I want to put a little bit more of a pop here around the doorway. So, grabbing the mask here, using the radial filter, I'm going to click and drag. And this allows me to set that shape. And what we can do here is 2 things. First up, let's adjust this a little bit. So I'll click invert, and this allows me to brighten that a little bit and adjust the clarity and the white point. Now I'm going to right click and duplicate that and tell it to not be inverted. And this allows me to start to darken everything outside of that around. Except now we'll just expand this ever so slightly and really maximize the feathering. So it's a nice gradual blend. There we go. And so what we've done is we've been able to reuse the 2 selections, one to pop the door and one to select what's around it. You'll see there that that's very powerful to allow you to stylistically guide the eye. And these type of vignettes are often called power windows. If we look at the 2 images side by side, you see that this one has a much clearer focal point. So if you want to really guide the eye and use your vignettes creatively, check out the effects panel as well as the radial and gradual filter that allow you to paint things in specifically where you want them. When dealing with images from a digital camera, there's naturally a little bit of softening that occurs. This is happening at the sensor side, and this isn't an out-of-focus image. Rather, it's really the impacts of compression in the digital file. But fortunately, Lightroom makes it easy to sharpen those details. Let's go to this waterfall image, and I'll just take a look at that as a single image. It looks pretty good, but I want to make a few tweaks. Let's just lift up the exposure a little bit here and pop the white point slightly. It looks pretty good, but I want to check out the details, so I'll go 1:1. I can see that there's a lot in there. It looks pretty good. Let's pull back out a little bit. And looking at the water and the rocks, it looks good, but I'd like to sharpen a bit. Down here in the details section is sharpening, right above noise reduction, which we looked at earlier. What you can do is really make some powerful adjustments here. Now, typically, it's a good idea to view things at 1:1 when sharpening. Now, you can increase the amount slider. And if you hold down the Option or Alt key, you can see that as a grayscale image. Look at how the water and the thin details really comes through. However, if you crank sharpening all the way up, you'll notice it tends to produce noise. And that's often the case because it starts to put it in all areas, including flat areas. So what I suggest is that you hold down the Alt or Option key and drag the masking slider. And now the areas in white are being sharpened. You see here that I'm now sharpening just the edges of the tree, but leaving the sky pretty much alone. Now, with the amount and the mask set, you could punch back in and start to play with the radius and the detail. Holding down the Option or Alt key and viewing the image at 1:1 is going to make it a lot easier for you to adjust. Looking at the grayscale file helps you dial in the aggressiveness. Let's pull that back out, and I have a much sharper image. Now, this is the sort of thing that you're going to want to tweak per image, but it can really go quite fast. Here it is. Select your photo and click 1:1. Go to a key area of the image that you want to really bring the details out. Hold on the Alt key and drag the sharpness slider, as well as the radius and the amount of detail. Then hold down the Option key and drag so you mask it so you only go after the edges. While you're at it, consider also reducing noise a little bit. These two tend to work hand in hand. What you'll see then is as you look at it is that the use of sharpening plus noise reduction will go a long way in helping the image. What this will allow you to do is to enhance some of the details and really bring things out. Remember, sharpening is subtle. If you're trying to go for contrast, you can always combine that. Taking advantage of some of the other adjustments, such as clarity here, will further improve the overall appearance of sharpness. Clarity is selective contrast, so if you combine that with a sharpness adjustment, what you tend to end up with is an image that's going to pop and look sharper and more richly detailed. When dealing with lenses, you'll often see perspective issues. Maybe it's the wide-angle lens that has a bit of a curve, or maybe you are shooting the photo at a high or a low angle and it creates some bending in lines that should be vertical or horizontal. There are several ways to fix this, but I want to show you the fastest and the easiest. Let's select an image here, and you'll see that there's a bit of a curve to this image. Well, that's pretty simple. First up, if you go down to the lens correction section, you'll see profiles, and this allows you to choose the camera and potentially name the manufacturer and the lens. Now in this case, I was using a Sony camera, and it was able to determine the type of lens that I was shooting with once I told it the model. The reason why it needed a little bit of information is that the metadata wasn't there for the exact details. And what you'll see here is that that helped fix some of the wide-angle distortion at the edges automatically. Now, you could tweak this a little bit with the distortion slider depending upon how the scene was shot, and this can allow you to compensate. But you also have controls under manual here that allows for more aggressive correction if dealing with perspective issues. And that's fine for pincushion distortion. But sometimes there's other types of distortion you might want to work with. So, for example, we can go to the transform section. And here are some powerful controls. We can do auto, which analyzes the vertical and horizontal lines and attempts to balance them out. That did a nice job there of straightening things. We can take advantage and tell it to go ahead and make the image level, not compensating vertically, but just dealing with the horizon, or force it to fix the vertical lines, or to be quite aggressive and force all lines horizontal and vertical. Now, this did correct the image, but it might lead to some extra areas that have to be cropped out or filled in. But you see that quite a bit of perspective problems have been dramatically changed here. Because I was shooting with a wide-angle lens, now the lines are truly straight. One of the things I really like, though, is the guided workflow. This allows you to draw some of the lines that you prefer. Once I start to set a few lines in here, maybe for the top ceiling and for the floor, you see it compensates. And then I can draw another line for vertical, and one more at this edge, and it compensates. allowing you to specify the grid. Well, let's try this on a less extreme example. In this case, I'm using a lens that works pretty well, but because I'm shooting from slightly above, the building isn't really a true rectangle. Using auto, it quickly fixes this. And that works quite nicely. If you want to be more aggressive, full is going to be a little bit more forceful in its adjustment. But this is again where guided comes in. The ability for you to just set the lines yourself, specifying what you think should be vertical, and in this case, the horizon of the sky, straightening the photo as well. By drawing 2 or more lines, 2, 3, or 4, you can very quickly fix key parts of the photo and get the image to be squared up, removing any perspective issues as well as any distortion caused by the lens. My name's Rich Harrington, and I hope you enjoyed this fast-paced look at getting results inside of Lightroom. Occasionally, we had to jump into a plugin or Photoshop to get the job done, but for the most part, I tried to get everything done using only the tools in Lightroom. Now, there's always more than one way to do things, so remember to check out some of the other courses available here in the online library that will often explore more detailed or advanced techniques. But I'm a big fan of getting results quickly, and I hope you found that you can do the same. Feel free to come back and revisit this class. So as you encounter image problems, come back and refresh yourself watching a movie. Or if you didn't make it through the full course this time, when you get a little more time, come back and watch some more. My name's Rich Harrington, and I have a lot more courses available in the online library, so be sure to explore those so they can help you improve your photography as well as your digital images. Thanks for watching.